Today, we're going to be talking about the last 3 ways that you can get receipts for God. Hey, guys, here we are with another episode of No Receipts Equals No Intimate Relationships. I want to first say I'm so sorry for this episode being a tad bit late. As I've shared with you guys before, I am pregnant right now with my second son, little Destin, and he just was giving me a little bit of a struggle for the last couple of days. Regardless, we're here, right? Today, we're going to be talking about the last 3 ways that you can get receipts for God. If you missed out on last week's episode, we went over the first 3 steps, which was number 1, your prayer life, number 2, being obedient, and number 3, asking. Those are the first 3 ways that you can get your own receipts for God. But before we go into today's episode, I want to first introduce myself. My name is Destiny Thomas, but most of my clients and my closest friends call me the Prayerpist. And that's because I conduct one-on-one online sessions in a therapy-like atmosphere where I work with people to strengthen their relationship with God, specifically through their prayer life. And if you want more information about that, you can go to realizingdestiny.com. But let's jump right into today's episode. So today we're going to be talking about the next 3 steps of how you can get your own receipts for God. Step number 4, being willing to sacrifice the now for later. So let me clarify. You've probably seen that meme that's going around on social media of Jesus holding the big bear behind his back, and the little girl has the little bear in her hand, and God's asking her to give it to them. So that's a perfect example, visual example on top of that, of what it means to be willing to sacrifice your now for something greater. So I have found with my clients, with myself, that so many times God wants us to sacrifice something that we have now, whether it's by paying our tithe, paying that top 10% off, by trusting and believing in God enough to pay your tithes, to believe that God's going to provide for more, even if you don't believe that you make enough right now. God, why would you want me to pay my tithes if I don't make enough to even cover my regular household bills? But that's what it means to truly trust God. And that's how you get receipts from God, by being willing to sacrifice what you have right now. And so I truly believe, and it's biblical, in the principle of sowing and reaping, right? So you have to be willing to sacrifice the now or the small in order to get the greater. So, for example, for me, I had to be willing to make one of the biggest sacrifices in my life, to leave my corporate job after 10 years and a really, really great salary, to believe that if God was telling me to do it, that what he had for me was going to be greater than what I had at the time. And if I be completely honest, it was, right? I have my peace, I have better health, I have my family, are just the way our houses ran is just a lot better. And I come home, well, I don't come home because I work from home, but I am at home more present with my son. And I just didn't have those luxuries being in corporate America. Now, that's not everybody's story, but that's mine. But I had to be willing to sacrifice what looks so good. The corporate job, the job that I made enough money to travel and buy my house and everything like that. But I had to trust God enough to be willing to sacrifice what looked great right then, to be able to live in the greater. So that's number 4. Number 5, you have to be willing to be set apart. I call this the great isolation season, right? So there's a season for all of us when God is pruning us, when God is taking us into the promised land for whatever season it is, when God is about to really, really bless us, that we go through this season called isolation, where we have to be set apart. We don't really mesh with our old friends. Not saying we will never reconnect with them, but God just really wants us to be alone with him. And a lot of people really don't like that season, so much so that they run away from it, and they just have to be around people that necessarily God don't want them around at that particular time. So you have to be willing to be set apart. You have to be willing to be alone for a season and really just focus on God and hear his voice and really do what it is he's asking you to do in order to get receipts from him. It goes back to number 1, which is your prayer life. You have to have that time where you be silent and still and set apart and really isolated to do what God wants you to do. Not only that, but in that particular isolation season, that's where God builds your confidence in Him. That is where I learned how to hear from Him the clearest, so that when He did reconnect me with certain friends or even family members, or even me and my husband, not reconnect us, we were still married, but there was a time where we were, kind of not talking as much when it came to about what God was telling me to do next and things like that. But when He started having me speak up about those things, there were things that my husband was like, "Oh, you sure God told you that?" Right? And I had to be confident in what I heard God say and be able to stand my ground and say, "Well, I think you should take that to prayer and see what God says," versus being led by your emotions or your flesh, right? So you have to be willing to be set apart. And last but definitely not least, number 6, you have to be willing to be the first to do it. Now, this one is the one I see people have the most trouble with, because we live in a generation and we live in a society where we use Google, we use YouTube, we research and research and research to find out how to do things. And there comes a time when God is calling you to do something first, right? So, for example, what it is I do in my direct bloodline or direct immediate family, I don't have very many entrepreneurs. I don't have very many at all that I was raised around and saw them choose entrepreneurship as their career route, right? Almost everybody I was raised around or grew up with in regards to aunts, uncles, they all took the route of corporate America, which is where I started, right? And so when God was calling me out of corporate and into entrepreneurship, it was very, very scary for me, because there was nobody to go pick up the phone and call and say, "How do you do a trademark? How do you do a LLC? How do you pay your taxes? How do you do X, Y, and Z?" Right? Not only that, but the actual vehicles that God was giving me to do entrepreneurship was something unheard of. The name itself, Prayerpist, was uncommon or not heard of at all. So it was also God giving me a lane where I had to define this word, what it meant, and explain it in a way where people wouldn't immediately have preconceived notions about it, right? And for a while, I struggled with the name. I struggled with how to go about, how to move forward, not to quit, because it was something I could not Google. I could not pick up the phone and call someone to do it. But because God is the creator, He is the creator. God creates new things. That's what He does, right? He created the sun and the moon and the water and us, right? So He's a creator. So there comes a time that God is calling you to be a first, and that will be one of the biggest ways you can get a receipt from God, by moving forward, by trusting what He's telling you, by trusting the name He's giving you, the color scheme He's telling you to use, whatever avenue it may be. And even in corporate, applying for a position that you don't seem qualified for, and nobody in your family has ever gotten to that particular position, graduating from college, you know, it doesn't have to be something necessarily new in the world. It could be something new for your bloodline, new for your family. So I believe last week's episode, I shared that one thing the Lord had instructed me to do was to write a book. And that was another first for my family, for my bloodline, for especially anyone in my immediate family that I can pick up the phone and call, or my down to like my great 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 grandma. I don't know of anyone that has written a book. And am I the first person to ever write a book? Absolutely not. But it was the first for my bloodline. You have to be willing to be a first in order to get receipts for God. Because I always tell my clients, especially if God has called you to be a generational curse breaker, which is a lot of us in this particular season and generation, you have to be willing to go against the current. For so long, people have been going in this direction, and you have to be willing to go this direction to be able to break it, right? Common sense, I guess. So let's do a recap. But number 1 was You can gain receipts for God from your prayer life. Number 2 was by being obedient. Number 3 was by just asking. Matthew 7:7 says, ask and you shall receive. A lot of us just don't take God at his word and ask, right? But today's episode, we talked about the last 3 ways that you can get receipts for God. And number 4 is by being willing to sacrifice your now for greater, right? Being willing to sacrifice your job today, your relationship that you think is your significant other, when God has told you over and over again, he's not the one, sis, let him go, right? Being willing to sacrifice that to get to your knight in shining armor. Number 5 is being willing to be set apart. You have to be willing to go through that isolation season where there's literally no one else around you to plant seeds in your mind, make you go in a different direction other than God. So you have to be willing to be set apart and just go through the fire. I promise you'll come out shining bright like a diamond. Cue Rihanna. And last but not least, number 6, you have to be willing to be a first to do it. You have to be willing to be the first to do it. God is the creator. He's amazing at creating new things. Why would he not do that with you? And once again, don't think so big. When I being the first to do it, once again, it doesn't mean ever in the world. But sometimes you could be like the Prayerpist and it could be ever in the world. But it could just be the first for your family, right? The first to get married and have children in wedlock. It happens. I want to keep these very short, very sweet, so you guys don't get bored on me. But this was the second episode of how to get receipts for God. Next week, you'll be hearing from me again about some receipts from God that I have gotten. But after that, I will be bringing on a guest who will share how she has gotten some quite amazing receipts for God and how it just built her confidence and her trust in God. So guys, I just want to thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to post below in the comments which out of these 3 do you have struggles with, right? Or if they're all, why do you think you struggle in these particular areas? Once again, guys, I just want to thank you so much for your time, for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe and click the notification bell so you can be the first to know when I drop the next episode. Thank you.
Hey, Destiny. Okay, so first, I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. I really can't find the right words to describe, but I will say this. I will say, I appreciate you in so many ways, not just because of what you did for me with your ministry, but you allowing God to use you and to constantly use you. But the fact of the matter is, I think a lot of people miss that you have to be filled yourself. And so just taking that time out and just being able to pour into others and actually listen to what God is saying so you are able to heal other people is amazing. So I thank you so much. I know personally for me, since I have been following your journal template, I've been talking to God more and I've been hearing him so clearly. Listen, clear as the blue sky, clearly. And I'm just so appreciative because I can definitely say before I didn't have that type of connection because I didn't allow myself to have that type of connection. And sometimes that's a very valuable piece that we always seem to look over, and being patient. As for me, I'm not a very patient person, but I'm gonna speak life upon my life. But I will say, like I said, just using your journal template and actually being able to feel the love on the pages that I'm writing, and I feel God's presence. It is everything to me. So I just want to thank you so much. And I look forward to seeing things that you do as far as your webinars and different speaking engagements, and continuously seeing you pray for different people, because that motivates me to want to allow God to use me to do the same thing. So thank you again.